Welcome back. We're now about to get into the actual Peloponnesian War fighting itself. There was actually quite a bit that happened, and it's impossible, obviously, to give a full account of all the events as described in the history of Thucydides. You're, of course, welcome to read that work in order to get a much fuller description. But I will show here some of the major things that occurred that pushed this war toward its very unsatisfactory conclusion, obviously, for the Athenians. So the war itself finally got underway in 431 BC after the incident with Thebes and Plataea. In the first year of the war, there was fairly indecisive fighting on both sides. Some Athenian soldiers were lost, and in 430 BC, Pericles delivered his famous funeral oration, the text of which is given at the very back of your World of Athens textbook. The funeral oration is really quite a remarkable piece of writing on the part of Thucydides. We are uncertain whether it, in fact, is a transcript of a real speech given by Pericles. Given Thucydides' rather cryptic introduction, in which he says that he will try to reproduce speeches as truthfully as he can, but where he is uncertain of the exact words, he tried to give the general gist of what was probably said at the time. That leaves scholars somewhat scratching their heads as to exactly what Thucydides' methodology really was. We have to presume that Thucydides probably did attempt faithfully to reproduce a speech that could easily have been given by the speaker in each case on the occasion when called for, but that it's also possible that Thucydides is using the speech as an opportunity to present some of his own views and perspectives on the war or on the particular cities in general who are involved with the war. So probably there's a mix of both of these involved in each of these speeches. Some of actual speech, or let's say purported actual speech, and some hypothesis on the part of Thucydides as to what the speech might have entailed and what kind of messages were important on the occasion to be delivered. So what we have from Thucydides, given in the mouth of Pericles, the Athenian leader, is a really outstanding speech. It's actually one of the most brilliant pieces of writing that we have anywhere in Greek literature, in which Pericles explains really what the war is about for the Athenians. It in fact takes him more than half of his oration to even get around to speaking about the dead themselves, or to offer any kind of comfort for the bereaved. And when he does so, the comfort that he offers may seem like cold comfort from our standpoint. So what does he first of all talk about in the speech in general? What he does is to explain the reasons for the greatness of Athens. In a way, the funeral oration may serve as an apology for his own leadership of the city that brought it to what he perceives as its height of greatness, especially over the last few decades. In the sense that Athens did indeed achieve a form of unparalleled greatness, that's pretty much beyond dispute. One looks over Athenian history, especially as we've detailed in summary form in these videos, you'll find that in the period leading up to the Peloponnesian War, the Athenians flourished in a way that was well beyond what they themselves had done previously, and probably exceeded the expectations or the achievements of most of the other cities of the time. It's not to say, of course, that the Athenians were unique in this respect, and Pericles may somewhat overstate the case in his speech to claim that the Athenians are essentially the model for all other Greek cities to follow anywhere. That is a little bit propagandistic, very likely. But the Athenians do indeed have a special say in regards to their greatness. That seems to be pretty well supported by other evidence we have. The Athenians are regarded by Pericles as the education of all Greece. And Pericles even uses the curious word erastai, E-R-A-S-T-A-I, which is lovers. It is indeed the root that we have for words like erotic in English. But the word erastai is applied to Athenian citizens as to the love that they have for their country lands. That's a rather curious use of terminology to describe the Athenian citizens' predilection of positive feeling toward their country city. Now, Pericles, obviously, again, is using this as an opportunity for celebrating Athenian greatness, probably as his means of explaining why the death of the soldiers in the first year of the war should be regarded as a reasonable, acceptable loss, even though obviously it's a great personal tragedy for those family members who have seen their loved ones pass away. So Pericles calls strenuously for parents who are capable of bearing children to please bear more children for the sake of the war effort. He really stretches this point rather hard in order to get them to understand this. He seems concerned that male relatives of the fallen will have to compete with their deceased relatives in terms of glory or honor, that it'll be hard for them to contend. And women are basically given the relatively chilly advice, even if they are members of the bereaved families, to basically keep themselves as low-key as possible, because their great glory is to be talked about as little as possible, whether for good or for ill. This is something that has had a lot of debate, as you can see with our light going out at the appropriate moment. It's a dark moment in the speech. It's a dark moment in the speech because it's one of the chilliest points of advice offered to these women. Other speeches that we have don't really have anything quite as blunt as this with regard to the role of women, and either Pericles or Thucydides, one or the other, seems to be unapologetic about the fact that women really do hold a firmly subordinate position in Greek society, and that with regard to war, there isn't really a great deal that the women can do to improve their own status when the men are fighting and potentially putting their lives on the line. This is something, by the way, that comes up in both in Euripides' Medea, which was published the year before this speech was delivered, and also in Aristophanes' comic play Lysistrata, in which the women who lead a revolution to take over the city of Athens from the men to stop the war effort, talk with great pain about the kinds of anguish that women have to go through while men make all the decisions and go off fighting in war and ultimately leave the women in the lurch. So it's quite a remarkable speech, and really for those who might be expecting a fairly typical eulogy, it's definitely anything but. It's as much a political statement about Athens as it is a eulogy for the bereaved and for the dead, and any comfort or words of consolation offered to the bereaved really seem to be much more about getting them revved up to help continue the war effort, rather than to offer them any genuine comfort for their sadness at having lost their relatives. Well, one can have whatever opinions one has about this particular speech, but Thucydides himself, if he meant this to be a really high moment in his history, very quickly undercuts it. We know that a detachment of the Athenian army and on board their fleet went off to points east, and apparently picked up an especially virulent disease that is now known today as the Athenian plague. And unfortunately, it got back to Athens, and it very quickly spread through the city. The city of Athens, like most ancient cities, was probably never especially sanitary to begin with, but the specific conditions imposed on the city, with all of the extra people brought in from the countryside and forced to live in very cramped housing, especially all up and down the long walls leading from the city down to the harbor of Piraeus, all of that made the city just exactly ripe for an epidemic of this nature, and it was in fact disastrous. Thucydides actually survived the plague himself, and therefore was able to give us a very full description of these symptoms. I will leave you to read the symptoms for yourself in the history rather than describe them here. We do have some possible ideas about exactly what sickness it is, although it appears that nothing in today's pathology charts matches that particular disease exactly, so it's possible that it's extinct. Different theories have circulated, such as typhoid fever, bubonic plague, or some combination thereof, possibly. Its virulence is much easier to see. Conservative numbers would say that about a tenth of the operating male population at Athens was killed off. It's very possible the numbers, if you take into account the broader Athenian population, might range anywhere from 20 to maybe even as much as 50% of the population that either fell sick or actually died, perished in the plague. It definitely had a terrible effect on the rowing population for the fleets, and the Athenians had a great deal of trouble continuing the war effort because of all the people who were supposed to row who suddenly fell ill. Pericles himself, unfortunately, was a victim of the plague. He did survive it, but he was already in his 60s, and it appears that he suffered from complications from the plague in the year afterwards, and ended up actually passing away with the plague. Before that happened, though, Pericles actually got fired from his office. The Athenians became so demoralized by how the war was going, which appeared to be not well at all, and from mishaps and such, that they threw Pericles out of office, even though he tried to defend himself and say, well, wait a minute, the war effort is still just fine. The plague was obviously something we couldn't anticipate, but I haven't changed my point of view. If you want to get rid of me now, that's something on you, that you must have changed something. I mean, do you really think it would be better to give back the empire? Well, the Athenians didn't buy it. They actually threw him out, but next year they actually brought him back in. However, he only lasted another year after that, and he ended up passing away in 428 BC. And thereafter, the leadership passed from him to the next generation of leader who had a very different temperament on the way that the war was to be carried out. Thucydides has a eulogy about Pericles in which he essentially celebrates Pericles as the greatest leader that the Athenians ever had, and certainly the most successful at bringing Athens to its position of greatness. I suspect that Thucydides means that genuinely, but I'm not entirely certain that that should be regarded and altogether as a positive thing. Because for Pericles to have done that meant that he had to really put the city of Athens pretty much on the razor's edge all the time. And if Pericles was there to take the full responsibility for it and to make sure that the Athenians stayed with his policies and followed his advice, then probably Pericles could be assured that if there were going to be any consequences to his policies, the Athenians were prepared to handle them. But now with Pericles' unexpected departure from the scene, with nobody trained to take over, to follow in his footsteps, there really wasn't a great deal the Athenians could do to find somebody who believed in what he said. And in fact, the leadership that would take his place would be pretty much the opposite. They would follow an entirely different course of action. So that's the end of Pericles, and that's the plague at Athens from 429 to 427 BC. So what we see is that over the next few years, we see some really troubling things happening, actually for both the Athenians and the Spartans. This war really does not go well at all for either side. The Athenians actually have a revolt at Mytilene in 428 BC. This is one of the big cities on the island of Lesbos, and Lesbos was one of the few large islands left over in the Aegean Sea that was continuing to supply ships as their tribute to the Athenians in the Delian League, and now, of course, for the war effort. But Mytilene had a rival city, Methymna, and the two of them did not like each other because Mytilene supported the Athenians, the Athenians supported the Spartans. A faction from Methymna got itself into Mytilene and sparked a civil war there, and the result was that the Mytileneans, now under a new faction, revolted from the Delian League. It was now left to the new fellow on the block, named Cleon. Cleon is someone you'll hear about if you should take my class on Greek comedy, 391. He's a rather comic fellow because it happens that his name means almost dog. Well, no, it doesn't actually. I'm just kidding. Cleon's name actually means famous or well known. But the problem is that his name happens to be very similar to the Greek word for dog, kuon in Greek, which is where our word cynic comes from. And he apparently had a very loud, raspy voice that would basically sound like a dog whenever he got really angry at the Athenian populace. Ruff, ruff. And he's described like that in Athenian plays, especially by Aristophanes. So, Cleon is now our new politician and also general. Now, Cleon does a good job of leading a counterstrike against the Mytileneans in order to bring down the revolt. That part's good. Then he calls an assembly at Athens once the Mytileneans are suppressed. And he says to the Athenians, let's kill every one of them. And the Athenians say, yes, absolutely. This, you can see now, is the start of the new policy, because it's very unlikely Pericles would have ever advocated such a point of view. Well, after the Athenians sent off a trireme to Mytilene to carry out this awful policy, they suddenly have second thoughts. And they call another assembly the next day. Cleon again has to speak to the assembly saying, what's going on? Why are you changing your minds? It is very important for you to keep your laws consistent, even if they are bad. If you have good laws, but they keep changing all the time, you'll never be able to enforce anything. And besides which, whenever anybody revolts, we have to crack down and make sure the revolt can't happen again. So that was Cleon's point of view. Rough, rough, rough. Like a dog. Well, now, a man named Diodotus gets up and speaks in opposition to Cleon, saying, well, I agree with Cleon. We can't be merciful to anybody who revolts. But wait a minute. If we kill off the whole male population, everybody will revolt because they'll either die revolting or they'll die in the punishment. So there is a vote taken, and by a narrow majority, because, of course, Diodotus spoke second, obviously, Diodotus' point of view carries out. The Athenians then have to send out another trireme to chase after the first one, and it arrives literally just as the first trireme has gotten there, and the general is about to unroll the scroll to reveal the death penalty when the second trireme comes up, and there's a call for a stop on that first order. Wait a minute. And the new order is given, which is that the Athenians will spare the Mytileneans the full destruction. They will instead only garrison the island, only change the constitution to be pro-Athenian, only kill off a portion of the male population, only enslave a portion of the women and the children, and that's all. Of course, much more merciful. So that's the end of the Mytilenean affair. And that's what now sets the stage for the new hardcore politics to come in Athens under Cleon and others. Well, now, speaking of hardcore, our good fellows, the Thebans. Remember them? Time for the Thebans to go after the Plataeans. The Thebans have had absolutely enough of the Plataeans being Athenian allies and refusing to abide by Theban law. So the Thebans move in, and they conquer Plataea finally. When they do so, they then call in the Spartans to support the decision to vanquish the Plataeans completely, totally destroy the population, and raze the city to the ground. The Spartans do not like this, but they are afraid to anger the Thebans because they know that they need the Thebans as allies. So the Spartans come up with a ploy, which is to ask every single Plataean, one by one, in a line, did you do anything to help the Spartans during the war? The Plataeans come up with a long speech in which they say, well, now remember the Battle of Marathon. We were the only ones to help the Athenians. And if that hadn't happened, then the Persians would have taken over. And so we have a long spin out of all the wonderful things the Plataeans did. And of course, the Plataea was the site of the Battle of Plataea. And the Spartans are nodding. Yes, this is obviously all true. Maybe the Plataeans are very nice people. And of course, we shouldn't destroy them. Well, the Plataeans are about to be spared, and the Thebans are unhappy about that. So the Thebans decide, guess what? We want to speak too. So the Thebans say, that's right, all those things that the Plataeans did, those are all wonderful things. So you know what? That means that the Thebans should doubly punish the Plataeans, because that means that the Plataeans ought to be able to stay good once they start off good. And because they didn't, Not only are they bad now, but they were good before, and they lost their goodness, so they should be doubly punished. So guess what? The Spartans try the same trick. Did you help the Spartans? No, kill them. Did you help the Spartans? No, kill them, each individual person. The only Plataeans who survive are the ones who made it to Athens. They ran away. And the Athenians end up granting the Plataeans citizenship if they got there. Remarkably, the Athenians do nothing else to help their former ally. Pretty shocking from the Athenian point of view. So, this isn't going well, as you could tell. Then we have Corcyra. Corcyra breaks up into a civil war, and this is how that happens. Corcyra does this because the Corinthians, remember them, had those prisoners that they got from the Battle of Sybota from Corcyra. They brought them back to Corinth. They kept them for 5 years, and then they released them back to the Corcyrians. Those Corinthian prisoners, now once again repatriated to Corcyra, start acting as, guess what, double agents. They start talking up the Corinthians in their government and trying to get the government to change itself to become more moderate toward Corinthians. What they're really doing is planting the seeds for an overtake of Corcyra. So, an actual coup happens. A bunch of assassins with daggers break into the council house and kill the officials. War breaks out. Athenians and Spartans are called in. The two momentarily stop fighting long enough to both go to deal with the crisis at hand. Both of them speak to their respective sides. Athenians to the Corcyrians, Spartans to the Corinthians. Both saying, okay, Spartans, Corinthians, come with us. This is not our affair. Get out. And the Athenians tell the Corcyrians, okay, now you two guys behave. No more trouble with you two. Okay? Athenians leave. Spartans leave. What would you guess happens next? Total anarchy. The word for that actually, in Greek, is stasis, S-T-A-S-I-S. It basically means a setup of political chaos. It literally means a standstill in Greece, in the literal meaning of the term. But it refers to a political condition of complete stall. And in this situation, we have total anarchy where the two factions, the one that was pro-Corinthian and the one that was anti-Corinthian, just turn on each other. It's also a democratic oligarchic one as well. And they start murdering each other every direction. And Thucydides spends several chapters in his history talking exactly about how the Corcyrian island breaks down in civil war. This is terrible for the Athenians, as well as the Corcyrians themselves, obviously. It knocks Corcyra out of the war completely. So the Corinthians, in that sense, got what they wanted. And the Athenians lose the Corcyrians as a critical ally because now the Athenians have no more opportunity to use them for help to get over to get over to Sicily if they should want to. And in fact, there were some things brewing over in Sicily as well. And the loss of Corcyra as a jumping point, as was promised, is going to turn out to be a very critical problem for them. But we will speak about Sicily in a later video when we come to the Athenian-Sicilian campaign. So this is all not going well. So what is going to turn this around? Well, we have another Athenian general, much more moderate than Cleon. His name is Demosthenes. Demosthenes was originally going to go around to assist with Corcyra, but when it became apparent that Corcyra was beyond repair, he spent his time instead going into Aetolia, which is the part of mainland Greece that's directly north of that long gulf. So essentially it would be the part that would be southeast of the island of Corcyra, if you check on your map. Demosthenes did some nighttime raids in the forest in Aetolia, trying to turn some Spartan allies over to the Athenian side. He actually almost got himself caught in one of his nighttime raids and was actually almost killed out there. But he managed to learn quite a bit about how to do nighttime operations, something that was relatively unfamiliar to the Greeks at that time. Once Demosthenes was finished with that, he went home, was able to pass his euthune, his annual checkup to make sure that he didn't disobey orders or spend money the wrong way. Even though he had changed plans, the Athenians ended up approving of this. Next year, Demosthenes, 425 BC, went around again. And if you look on your map, you'll see that for Demosthenes to get from Athens to Aetolia, he has to go south of the Peloponnesus, like this. He's going to come up this way. Aetolia would be like up here. And in fact, right in the southwest corner, you should see Pylos, P-Y-L-O-S. Demosthenes got stuck there in a storm. When he landed there, the Athenians were stranded with nothing to do, and the soldiers started building a fortification right there on the spot, to everybody's surprise. As a result, they all of a sudden got Pylos fortified and blocked off from the Spartans. When the Spartans heard about this, of course, they were apoplectic. They immediately sent over a sea contingent to try to take Pylos back, and the sea contingent landed on the nearby island called Sphacteria. Well, the Athenians saw them there and were able to do a countermaneuver and were able to hold off the Spartan land force that tried to come in and take away Pylos. Once that land force was defeated, the force that was on the island ended up being abandoned completely. They were actually trapped there and had no help. And the Spartans were unable to get in because the Athenians completely fortified both the island and Pylos by that time. The problem now, however, was that there was a stalemate, basically, because the Athenians now couldn't invade the island to actually get these guys because it was a heavily forested island. So the campaign dragged on and on and on with no conclusion. It even got to the point where both sides started doing a kind of espionage underwater, where the Spartans would try to sneak food across, and the Athenians would send underwater swimmers to stop the Spartans from getting across, and so forth. But after a while, this bogged down. Now, in addition to Demosthenes, one other general who was involved in this effort was named Nicias. Cleon, with his big, rough voice, went to the Athenian assembly and called for Nicias to be recalled, wondering what was going on with this campaign. So, Nicias went home. Demosthenes stayed at the campaign site. Nicias reported to the assembly, and then Cleon opened up his barking yap and said, "Ruff, ruff. If it were my choice, I would get out there and get this whole thing finished in 27 days. If I were general." And Nicias said, "Fine, you become general, I resign." And the Athenian assembly all cheered and said, "Yes, Cleon, go, Cleon, go, Cleon." And Cleon was like, "Wait a minute, I didn't really want to become general." "Well, too bad, you're general now." So Cleon tried to back down, but everybody got him revved up. So now Cleon is on the spot, and now he says, "Okay, I'll do exactly what I said. I'm going to go lead a force over there and get all finished within 27 days. Well, he was very lucky, because just about the point when he arrived there with his force, one of Demosthenes' counterforces that would land routinely on the island to try to scout out where the Spartans were, happened one evening to make dinner on one of the beaches, and somebody had a campfire going. And apparently, they accidentally got to let the campfire get loose, and it set fire to the grass, which then quickly, probably because it was during the dry season, spread immediately into the interior forest. And all of a sudden, the forest completely took fire. The Spartans, of course, all of a sudden were flushed out into the open, and when the Athenians got to see where they were now, instead of being under the cover of the trees, they realized that there were not actually as many of the Spartans as they had feared. And now, of course, they could not hide. So now the Athenians got themselves organized. Now with the reinforcements from Cleon, they invaded the island and forced the Spartans up onto a cliff where the Spartans about ready to jump over and commit suicide into the water, the Athenians called for them to surrender. And quite surprisingly and unusually for the Spartans, they actually did surrender and become prisoners. The Spartans at home, when they heard that some of their men had been taken prisoner, were absolutely shocked. And the presence of these prisoners in Athenian hands would have quite catastrophic effects, on the outcome of the war that will follow. We'll take this up now in the next video. The Athenians now are at a high point because they now have these Spartan prisoners. It will not last. See you next video.